I've spent the last week in awe of the brand new MacBook Pro 13 with the M1 processor. This thing is small, quiet, powerful, and even for somebody that's a big fan of the MacBook Pro 13, like yours truly, this has really surprised me in how well it works. But despite all of that, it is not the top of the line when it comes to MacBooks. To this date, that still resides with the much beefier, bulkier, and yes, louder, MacBook Pro 16. So today, let's put these two head to head. Is the MacBook Pro 16 still the king of the mountain? For the moment at least. And when we're talking about this, is it worth potentially spending twice as much on the MacBook Pro 16? Let's find out. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. Both of these are absolutely fantastic machines, and I've personally been using the MacBook Pro 16 for almost the past 6 months as one of my main primary computers. It's fantastically powerful, but my heart and my emotions will always lie with the MacBook Pro 13. When I've got to travel and I need power, I always bring along one of these. For me, it's the perfect computer. Except before now, the power was fine, but it was never anything more than just fine. It was usable, but it wasn't great. As we start the comparison today, let's lay out the specs you can get on both of these computers and what is the price at which you can get those components. And when we're done with all of that, I'll let you know the specific models that I've got on hand today. The MacBook Pro 16 can be had in a few different models. The lower end model starts off with a 2.6 gigahertz, 6-core 9th generation Intel i7 processor. You can get 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM and an AMD 5300 4 gigabytes dedicated graphics card, with the base model having 512 gigabytes of storage. This package can be had retail for around $2,399. Don't let that price shock you as much because of the age of this computer. It does go on sale all of the time, and without much work, you could probably find one of these for around $1,999. The MacBook Pro 16 can be spec'd all the way up to a top-of-the-line model with an 8-core, 2.4 gigahertz i9 processor, 64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, a brand new 5600M with 8 gigabytes of HMB2 memory, lots of specs, and a staggering 8 terabytes solid state drive. Man, I love saying that last line. 8 terabytes on a laptop, that's still crazy. Now, all of that doesn't come cheap, and the maxed out version will cost you $6,499. Ooh. Oh, that hurt me in my heart wallet. The brand new MacBook Pro 13, on the other hand, also kind of comes in a two-tier system, but functionally, they basically do the same thing. Now, the MacBook Pro 13 comes with that brand new M1 processor, which it has a slightly different nomenclature. For simplicity's sake, without getting too far into the laptop nerd talk, its CPU is an 8-core processor, and that processor has an 8-core GPU built inside of it. At the base model, you also get 8 gigabytes of unified memory and a 256 gigabyte solid-state drive, and this will hit your heart wallet right about here for $1,299. You aren't only limited to this. There are a few spec options here that will let you go all the way up to 16 gigabytes of unified memory and a 2 terabyte solid-state drive for $2,299. So yes, there is a bit of a price difference between the two. The models that I owned and we have on display here is the MacBook Pro 16 with 2.4 gigahertz i9, 32 gigabytes of RAM, the Radeon 5500M, and a 2 terabyte solid-state drive, which you can also get for around $38.99. The MacBook Pro 13 has the 16 gigabyte of memory and a 1 terabyte solid-state drive for $18.99. So in my versions, about double the price. The comparison here is going to be a little harder to make than normal because, like I said, while both Macs are running Mac OS, they are unfortunately structurally running on very different underlying code. That's not a deal breaker. We'll figure our way out. Let's start off physically. Obvious facts out of the way first. One is a 16-inch laptop and the other is a 13-inch laptop. There will be some size differences. Both have the Magic Keyboard, which means it's fantastic, and the Magic Keyboard is easily my favorite keyboard ever made. The keys are crisp, they're precise, it's so easy to get into a rhythm when typing, and it's a refreshing keyboard to work with. I absolutely love it. If I really had to make a complaint here, it's that the MacBook Pro 16 keyboard is just a little too spread out for my hands. I have pretty standard sized hands, and it is a little harder to reach those T's and Y's on the 16 as opposed to the 13. I mean, come on, Gary, that's kind of a small nitpick, and not something that I would call a deal maker or breaker. The 13, though, is perfect for typing. I have not a single complaint about the 13 for typing. It's my favorite computer to type on ever made. The displays on both the 13 and the 16 are roughly the exact same, minus the size difference, and they do look fantastic. Apple has done a great job making these Retina panels. They're both very color accurate with P3 accuracy, and both of these displays can go up to 500 nits of brightness. The only complaint that I probably level here is that the MacBook Pro 13 is the same display that we've seen here for the last few years. It's fine, but the bezels do look pretty dated at this point. For example, take the new Dell laptops for how good a laptop display can be. Those look so good. The MacBook Pro 16 has a similar design, but compared to the old 15-inch MacBooks, Apple did slightly reduce the bezels here to achieve that bigger display space. So it does look more modern when we're checking out the monitor on the MacBook Pro 16. That's not the only physical difference though. Both of these computers do have a sad lack of I/O, and they make up for this by having the very versatile Thunderbolt 3 port. Where these two diverge is that the MacBook Pro 16 has the correct number, or I guess we could call it the better number of ports, having 2 on each side. You got 2 on this side, and you got 2 on this side. The problem is though, the first iteration of an Apple Silicon MacBook Pro 13 only has 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, and both of them are on the left side. And if we're being honest, I'm not a very big fan of having the ports set up like this. If you are going to only have 2 ports on the body, at least move them onto different sides. For example, the Razer Blade Stealth 13 that we unboxed a few weeks ago, it doesn't have an SD card reader, and it also only has 2 ports of each, but it has them on each side. So one side gets a USB-A and a Thunderbolt, and so does the other. This irritates me a lot, because if you have a small dongle or some other type of accessory that doesn't have a cord plugged in, you basically give up. You basically only have one Thunderbolt port. And I don't think that's acceptable for a laptop that costs $1,299. Plus, if you are someone that uses a lot of external monitors, the MacBook Pro 16 can support up to 2 6K or 4 4K monitors, whereas the MacBook Pro 13, it can only support one external monitor up to 6K. Now, I only personally use one ultra-wide monitor, so it's not a big deal for me, but it could be a big deal for you. Another absolute difference between the two, and the last physical difference we're going to cover, are the speakers. Both do have top-firing speakers next to their keyboards. However, thanks to the laws of physics, the more space we have to work with, the bigger speakers we can put in the laptop body. The MacBook Pro 13 speakers, they're totally fine. They're totally fine, and they're not actually that bad. Compared to other laptops, they are fantastic. But they're only okay when we talk about the MacBook Pro 16. Nothing on the market, period, comes close to how good these speakers sound. To this day, this laptop has the best sounding speakers I've ever come across. They are so good that you don't really need a separate set of speakers for this machine. It's got plenty of bass, plenty of clarity, and as a non-audiophile, we've now exhausted my lexicon on audio terms. These are just fantastic. Fantastic. So physically, when we talk about the two computers, there's not that much difference between the earlier 2020 models. But now let's get to the big thing, the new processor. The new M1 processor does work off of an ARM architecture, and again, for simplicity's sake, that just means that native programs that have been running for Mac will need to be optimized for this computer to do the best. I say that they need to be optimized, but don't let that scare you into think that you'll have huge compatibility issues or that your programs from Intel architecture just won't work. Apple released a program called Rosetta 2 that for the most part will easily open and run your older programs that haven't yet fully transitioned. Yes, there are some that aren't currently working, but I personally haven't had an issue with anything. I have seen other people complain about it online, which is why I'm mentioning it here, but I haven't had an issue. When it comes to raw power though, it's really hard to say which is better. When we compare apples to apples, get it? And we run a program that's native to both, namely Final Cut Pro, when we do that through some video renders, both work fairly closely. Rendering the same 5-minute 4K clip gave us these kind of numbers on the 13-inch and these kind of numbers on the 16-inch. But that's just one video editing program, and the newest version is optimized entirely for the Apple Silicon ecosystem. If we go to one that does absolutely favor a dedicated graphics card like DaVinci Resolve, we'll have a pretty similar time while editing, but the render will be twice as fast on the MacBook Pro 16. But on the other hand, the thing that's really impressive about these new Apple Silicon chips is they handle high efficiency video codecs like these computers handle traditional codecs. The M1 Macs handle footage that other computers will straight up struggle with, and it's darn impressive stuff. I guess all of this rambling boiled down means that both will excel in different situations. And as of the releasing of this video, like as of today, I wouldn't say that either really has the edge. But that's a point that should be made, in that the real impressive part here is that they are pretty close to the same level, with one legit running half the cost of the other. If, let's say we took price out, price is no longer a factor. It would academically be a tougher decision, but price is a factor for everybody. Like, nobody has an unlimited budget, and I don't know that I've yet seen anything that matches the M1 MacBook Pro 13 for price to performance. Another big factor, and I'd say is actually the biggest factor when it comes to laptops, is thermal performance. That's the one thing we talk a whole bunch of stuff about laptops, but the one thing a laptop has to handle properly is thermal performance. If you have a laptop that throttles its performance due to poor thermal management, you are literally throwing money away. Both of these do have a built-in active ventilation system, with the MacBook Pro 16 obviously having the much beefier and much more robust system, and honestly it needs it. Intel chips, especially the i9, runs hot. That's not an Apple thing, that's an Intel thing. These chips, like, if you're running a system with an Intel chip, they need to be properly ventilated or that system will be brought to its knees. Now, I've never personally had a thermal problem with the MacBook Pro 16. Like I said, I've been using this for about 6 months. I've run it through a lot of very tough situations, and I've played my fair share of World of Warcraft on this thing at pretty high settings, and I've never once seen the MacBook Pro 16 thermally throttle. But though it hasn't thermally throttled, you can definitely tell when it's working, and you can tell that because the fans kick way the heck in. Here's the problem though. When I only had the MacBook Pro 16, it didn't bother me because in isolation, these fans don't get all that loud. However, he says snarkily as we start talking about the other computer. However, this MacBook Pro 13 with the new Apple Silicon chip, it has a fan, and I know that because Apple says it does, but I don't know that I'd swear to it. Because I've never heard this thing turn on. I've never heard it when rendering 4K video, and even when we're playing games or we're doing work, I can't feel air being pushed through the back of this computer. You cannot even tell that this fan works. In fact, if Apple came out tomorrow and said, JK everyone, we didn't actually put a fan on these, I would believe them. I would believe them because this thing is bonkers thermally managed. I don't think it would matter if they did come out and say it doesn't have a fan because the thing never heats up. The thing never heats up. Even the MacBook Air, the new MacBook Air doesn't even have a fan, and I've had no problems thermally with that machine. This right here, you can tell I'm getting excited. This is the real win for the new Apple chips. It fundamentally changes how laptops function because we've got real power on this thing without having any real heat problems. I hate. That was 4 hates. I hate using the term game-changing, and I really, as I was typing this script, I pondered whether I should put it in here or not. But these are actually game-changing computers. And it's not, the cool thing is though, it's not just the thermal performance that's mind-blowing. Battery life? Oh, let's talk about battery life. It's unreal. It's unreal. And that again, I'm put in a lot of weird positions today. Normally when we do tech videos here on the Everyday Dad, I only give a pass or a fail rating. That actually worked. I only give a pass or a fail rating for battery life. If a piece of technology can last one full workday of 8 hours of use, I give it a thumbs up and we all go on with our lives. And the MacBook Pro 16 easily meets and exceeds that number. It's got fantastic battery life. It's got as big of a battery as you can put in a laptop and still get it on a plane. But that doesn't mean it has the best. The difference is so striking here that I have to mention it. Apple states the M1 MacBook Pro 13 can achieve up to 20 hours of battery life. That's insanity. That's insanity. But those are just numbers on a spec sheet. You won't actually appreciate it until you start using these laptops. The battery seems to last forever. And it's not just that it's great when in use, when you shut it down, when you close the lid, it loses almost no battery life. All of that combined, the high efficiency cores, the power turning off, this is the most efficient design I've ever seen on a laptop. It's amazing. It's amazing, and I will say that this is the best battery life that I've ever seen on a laptop. You are truly free to not need to worry about power when running an Apple Silicon computer. It's game-changing. But at the end of the day, so what, right? Which of these comes out on top? Like the iPad videos last week, there are actually a couple of questions buried into that one overarching question. First, if you have a MacBook Pro 16, should you dump it for the new MacBook Pro 13? I absolutely have, because I use this with one external monitor 100% of the time in the house, and the 16 likes to run its fans when plugged into a monitor. If you want the quietest laptop you can get for the work from home office, absolutely get the MacBook Pro 13. If you don't care about fan noise and need lots of monitor support, then yes, get the MacBook Pro 16. Plus, if you have programs that really need that dedicated graphics card, this is the way to go. If you don't have a MacBook, which one should you get? Much like the last suggestion, if you need lots of monitor support or bigger internal drives, go with the 16. But in every other way imaginable, battery life, power, and price to performance, this MacBook Pro 13 is in a whole other league. This isn't even playing the same game. And you can take the savings from the 13 and get a full working from home setup or a few accessories that would get you set up in whatever endeavor you wanted to use the MacBook for the same price as the MacBook Pro 16. I can't make a very cut and dry statement because neither of these is bad. We just happen to be at a crossroads where they are both good at separate things, and we'll need to wait for the updated 16-inch version before the comparison is really put to bed and there's an objectively better MacBook Pro 16. And if you like this video and are curious about which accessories you should get for the brand new MacBook Pro 13, good news, I've got a video for you right here. Click right here to go ahead and watch. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching. And yes, I smashed my elbow into the table.